Hi, everyone. Welcome to what continues to be an evolving special edition of the 501c Drop. First of all, I'm Leya Simmons. I am the CEO and co-founder of BetterUnite. Please welcome to 501c Drop, where weekly we talk to industry experts, we share sector-based knowledge with nonprofit advisors and consultants, event planners, auctioneers, all kinds of folks that work in and around nonprofits, not just with fundraising, but really the entire nonprofit ecosystem. And I am joining you today from my new studio. Very excited to be in it. And I anticipated being joined by Laura Hutira, who is the president of M. Gale and Associates, a world-renowned consultancy for nonprofits. We recorded a session this morning and we had some audio issues. So the audio was compromised, and it is, let me just tell you, actually somewhat of a travesty because it was an incredible conversation. I am joining you solo today and hopeful that I can encapsulate a lot of what Laura and I discussed. She was sharing insights from her, and here, let me share my screen. Cultivating Generosity, Nurturing a Culture of Philanthropy for Nonprofit Success. Laura, who is also a CFRE designate, she shared this presentation at a Better conference back in September. It was wildly popular, a wonderful presentation. I didn't actually get to see at the time. I was in a different presentation room, but I heard rave reviews about it, and I'm so excited I was really thrilled to discuss all of this with her. It was a fascinating conversation, as I said. I will do my best, like I said, to go through and talk about a lot of the pieces that we covered. A lot of what Laura is actually, and was this morning and back in September, discussing was the Giving USA report that was released in 2025, our most recent one. We'll get another later this year in 2026, looking at fundraising trends throughout the United States. We both are a part of the Giving Institute. That is the organization that backs and supports Giving USA. Laura is also a part of the Generosity Commission, and that's where her special focus in the idea of cultivating generosity comes from. She is Laura, let me just give a bit of her bio. She has worked with M. Gale for the past 12 years, became president just last year in 2025 of the organization, or of the company, excuse me. M. Gale, as I mentioned, a consultancy working with nonprofits of all sizes across the board, based in Fort Worth. Before that, Laura spent over a decade working with different nonprofits, including the Fort Worth Zoo, All Saints Episcopal School, as director of development and in capital campaigns. So she is just a wealth of knowledge. She and M. Gale have been a part of the Giving Institute since, I think she said 2018. I want to make sure I get that right. And BetterUnite joined in 2023. I actually, in 2025, was elected the secretary of the Giving Institute. So she and I are both very involved with this work, which is a sector-based leadership group coming together 3 times a year to discuss. And, we see presentations, we have conferences on all kinds of topics relative to our nonprofit world. It's comprised, the Giving Institute, of tech companies like BetterUnite, consultancies like M. Gale and Associates, and I guess there's some legal organizations, some marketing organizations that have a specialty and focus, at least at a minimum of 5 years, on the nonprofit sector. So super interesting. So I got some notes here because I wanted to write down quickly, some of what I can frankly remember from my chat this morning with Laura. And And I think this idea of cultivating generosity as a culture shift within and around our organizations is fascinating. It's clear when you hear from Laura that she is just really exceedingly passionate about this topic. Let me just also note that she will be joining me later this spring for a Tuesday session, a 501c drop session, where we will kind of continue this conversation. So I'm kind of laying the groundwork, and she can then answer questions that you all might have around this topic. I'll do my best today, but she is the true expert on this topic. So whether you're an executive director, development director, volunteer director, board member, maybe a donor to nonprofits, when you're joining me today, there is a place for you in this conversation. So let me kind of start with some of her really powerful ideas. And I'm also going to maybe reflect on my time as a development director, executive director. I have a decade of experience working with nonprofit organizations prior to founding BetterUnite. So a lot of what we talked about today resonated so deeply with me. It was it really very much mirrored my experience working with boards. And frankly, actually now I serve on a couple of boards, frankly now mirrored a lot of what I currently experience as a board member for nonprofits. So Laura started with the root of the word philanthropy, which I thought, this is fascinating. I don't know, in all of my years, I have never looked at this. The philanthropy comes from philos anthropos, the love of humankind. So at its essence, philanthropy is not just about donations or giving even of financial means. It is about all of the aspects of nonprofit organizations. It's about your shared values. It's about obviously your mission, but it's very much about relationships and human connection. So that love of humanity that is the root of philos anthropos, I think, or philanthropy today, as we call it, I think I love the expansion of that concept beyond just a philanthropist, which we typically will think of as a rich person that's donating money. Anybody can be a philanthropist. Most people, I would argue, are philanthropists in one way or another. There's something that we say, many of you likely know, this axiom in our nonprofit, especially development world, where we talk about people giving of their time, treasure, and talent, the 3 T's, right? And so often, particularly in a development world, we give short shrift to time and talent. And I've long thought that is an uncomfortable reality. It is an absolute reality that nonprofits and nonprofit work requires donations. It requires receiving of financial contributions. And it also means that there are so many other places and ways that folks can give, depending on where they are in their cycle of philanthropy, of that love of humanity. So Laura has this concept of cultivating within nonprofit organizations a culture of philanthropy, of generosity, excuse me. And what she means by this is moving away from that very transactional nature and moving much more toward a relationship cultivation, a connection point, an interweaving of our stories and our dialogues and that human-centered approach to generosity. And something that we talked about is, that there's this, and I think these are my words and not hers, but there is a tendency a lot of the time, and I think about this a lot relative to event fundraising. There's a tendency to treat donors as kind of ATMs, to just look to, and that sounds terrible. And I know no one on this call actually thinks of a donor in that regard, but there's a kind of a transactional nature to a lot of what we do, right? Making sure that you've received your ticket, making sure that you've got your seat at the table, making sure that you've received the receipt and the fair market value of whatever it is that you've done. And those things can be complex and they can be obviously quite important, but they are so much a surface level of what real philanthropy and real cultivation of this generosity is trying to do. What we're really trying to do, and in the event context, is to create connection, that we can also build upon, that we can use the momentum from to continue to move into, through a moves management system or whatever else, move people from an immediate transaction to a lifelong relationship with our nonprofit. And so in the kind of service of this culture of generosity, we want to move from transactional nature to treating folks as though they are mission partners and really building up that kind of partnership dialogue. And some of this, speaking to the word dialogue, and Laura talked about this a lot today, is a language shift, moving away from transactional language and moving much more towards relational language. And I'm going to get to a little bit more of that in a minute, but we want to take away the only focusing on the dollar amount to focusing more on time, yes, money, but also volunteering and then giving of influence as well. I actually remember a moment when I was a development director and we had a longtime volunteer that never gave financially. And, I had a board member at some point saying, well, shouldn't we be moving her along to make a financial transaction, to make a donation? And she was a younger woman, but she had been a long time supporter of the organization, who was also very vocal on social media in support of the organization. And I remember saying, she already gives, the period, end of story. And there's no need to force the issue, right? When you're building relationships, the relationship is not an end game. There is no end game. These are practices that we have that evolve over time, and some move in a direction of a financial contribution and some maybe never do, but there is always some value to whatever way somebody is being generous. So I think this shift is seeing kind of generosity as a spectrum, not as a single definite point, certainly not as only a financial point. And another thing that Laura talked about, and I could not agree with this more, frankly, we talk about this in for-profit companies as well, is that culture flows from the top. So Laura has done a lot of work with boards and board members around coming in as an outside consultant, which she said is frankly sometimes a lot easier way, right? It's this external person that comes in and talks to your organization and your board and your staff around, this is working, this isn't, let's evaluate, now let's change some things. Now let's look at some data. But she made very clear that this is not something that only a consultant can do. As an advancement department or development department, or as a CEO or executive director or development director in a solo shop, there is a language shift that can occur when you're talking to your board to encourage a much more of a culture of rounded generosity, I'll call it. That's my word again, not Laura's. But so that you're, instead of only reporting on the metrics of how many donations came in, what was the ROI on the event, obviously all still necessary, but also talking about volunteerism. Speaking at board meetings to metrics around influencers, around people who have stayed engaged with the organization in a multitude of different ways. So consistently bringing those issues up to board members can help to make that shift. And Laura emphasized this as well. That shift is not a single or linear shift. Culture shifts take time. Culture builds over years, decades even. And so when you begin to right a ship or set it on a new path, it's not going to be a one-time thing. It's going to take some time. And that's just the nature of the game. And frankly, this is something that we want, right? Like, as nonprofits, we do not want to be talking about only the next donation or only the next transaction or only the next month or year. We want to be talking in much more 5-year plans and decade-long plans that contributes to the longevity piece. So when we coming back around to our culture of generosity, if you do have a board that's maybe stuck in a much more transactional feel, she also suggested maybe pulling in one board member. Maybe it's your development committee chair. It's anybody that you could maybe have this conversation with around, let's begin to make this subtle shift. Let's begin to change the relationship that we have to the idea of generosity within our organization, and begin to see kind of, what that can do, what that can bring. So I found that very fascinating. And I found it fascinating also because this has been my experience as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, both working with boards and now being on a board, I've seen there be times where this was actually an anecdote I was telling Laura earlier today. With the working board that I've come in and worked with some nonprofits, one from the board side that I'm thinking of, and one from the staff side, where the board considered themselves a working board. That, in my experience, and this is with two organizations I'm thinking of, that almost excused the board from thinking about philanthropy in a financial sense. They certainly considered themselves fiduciary oversight. They considered that they had fiduciary responsibility and oversight with the nonprofit, but they did not think, and particularly a couple of the major donors, they did not think that also encompassed, kind of spreading the word of their nonprofit, of the nonprofit that we were a part of. And those were organizations that I did myself come in and have to kind of right the ship in that we rewrote the job description for the board members. So in our board packet or board appeal to new or prospective board members, we from the outset let them know that there was not only a financial, kind of expectation, giving meaningfully, whatever that meant for them, to the nonprofit, but it also meant talking to their friends about making financial contributions to the nonprofit. And at the time, I did not really think as much about this shift in the culture of generosity that Laura was talking about. And I really do wish that I could kind of go back in time, rewind the tape, and include much more conversation around volunteerism and giving of your talent as well. There was actually an organization I worked with where I did this, again, not quite as intentionally as I hope anyone listening today will move forward with, but I encouraged the board members to create short little 30-second videos around why they give. And we related these we were looking for recurring donors. So we were relating these smaller amounts to a cup of coffee or a lunch out or whatever once a month, right? And having the board member film themselves talk about that they were doing this and that they were encouraging other people in their social networks to do the same. It was actually very successful. I did not get every board member to do it. Many of them felt like very uncomfortable. It was very new, and I really got that. I get that today. But that's also our job, right? Is to stretch our board members maybe a little bit outside of their comfort zone so that they can make bigger appeals, broader asks, become influencers themselves and ambassadors really for the organization. So again, back to finding that one person, one board member that you can kind of recruit to your way of thinking, to a mindset shift around generosity and changing the language that can really begin to move the needle. And then peer-to-peer is always a better approach, right? So board member to board member, staff to staff. That way we're talking about a culture of generosity throughout the organization. Laura actually today shared an anecdote about an organization that she worked with where they had really kind of siloed groups, like the curatorial staff was siloed over here. They had conversations. The advancement staff, they had conversations. The executive staff had conversations, volunteer, but they very rarely all spoke together. And so Laura and M. Gale came in and they encouraged breaking down some of those barriers and boundaries and beginning to communicate among each other. And in that communication, changing the narrative, changing the language and the way that they spoke about generosity, to the extent that they actually pulled in the custodial staff and began talking to the custodial staff about, this is a nonprofit. You are doing the work for the love of humanity in this organization, and this organization and this building and everything else relies on the generosity of every single person that walks in here. And having that kind of through line was very important. And Laura saw some wonderful results with that organization as they began to make that really intentional shift. I just absolutely love that. So creating that culture of generosity really means creating space for reconnection. Laura also shared that in this process, she said sometimes one of the bigger parts of her job as a consultant is to come in and encourage her organizations to celebrate the small wins. So, last week actually on the 501c drop, I had Aaron Peshoff, who was talking about, kind of grit and the part they don't tell you about, which is just drive, and how that actually ends up contributing to the burnout that we see and the kind of massive turnover in staff that we'll often see with nonprofits. And pushing for pushing's sake. And so Laura encourages her clients and her organizations to celebrate wins. Don't just, hit the milestone and move right on to the next one. It's there, sure, we know this, but do take a moment, pause, and be kind to the staff, be kind to yourself, acknowledge what you've accomplished. That is a piece as well of cultivating that whole culture of generosity, because you all are also a part of that incredible generosity, that philanthropy that is occurring just by virtue of being where you are and holding the seat that you do. So Laura referenced the Giving USA, and here's where I'm really going to lean on my notes. She referenced the latest data in the Giving USA data, which came out, as I said, in 2025, looking back at 2024. So in 2024, Americans gave $592.5 billion to charity. That's a 6.3% increase from 2023. That is on par. We've seen, except for 2022, we saw a slight dip. That was when the stock market went down. Every year since 2008, that's not right. Maybe it is. Maybe it's 2013. I'll have to check my notes from our meeting. We've seen an uptick in the total dollars given. It's really significant, especially because the giving has outpaced inflation, and that happened for the first time in 2024, or in 3 years that's happened. But it also gets a little bit more complex than that. Individual giving is still the majority at 66%, but we continue to see a decline in everyday donors. And then here's where we see the increase coming in our overall dollars. Mega gifts and foundation giving are increasing, but that concentration poses long-term risks. Laura spoke a lot about the Lilly School of Philanthropy at the University of Indiana, which, by the way, if any University of Indiana alum or fans out there, congratulations. Last night they won the college football championship. But they've done a lot of research. They do a lot of work looking at sector-based giving as well as just giving overall, in addition to the Giving USA report. And what we discussed is that, if your culture, and honestly, this is a sector-wide kind of issue or concern, if our culture of philanthropy is built around only high net worth individuals, it becomes fragile. We just saw some reports from the Gates Foundation as well, committing to higher dollars amount. I think it was $9 billion that they'll give in 2026, and a reduction in their staff by about 500 people. But also, they're going to shutter the entire foundation in 2045. So, if we think about these mega groups giving, it's the Generations in Giving report also reinforces this. Here's another piece of our generational topic. Baby boomers still give the most, but Gen X and millennials are becoming more central. And then Gen Z, they care deeply, but they give differently. So we're going to get back to that. But the point is, a strong culture of generosity can really diversify your revenue and, here's the key, your relationships. It doesn't rely on just one segment. It relies deeply on community-wide ownership of the organizations. So I want to touch on a little bit from the Generations in Giving report. A couple key takeaways. The baby boomers still lead in average gift size, but the Gen X group, and I would include myself in that, is the most active volunteer group. And then millennials, they are giving more than ever. And they are, you're kind of in your early 40s. They're beginning to become more engaged, more involved in schools and organizations, but also in sector-based giving. They value impact and values alignment more than they do organizational alignment. And then Gen Z donors are almost exclusively, to date, issues driven. They prefer flexible giving models as well. So here's where you're going to think about stock donations, crypto donations, although that skews wildly, but also online text to give, QR codes, really, really important when we're talking about that breadth of donations. Another piece that I actually remember from the Generations and Giving report is that, and this was a total surprise to me, Gen Z, they like to receive non-transactional direct mail pieces. Up to 80%, actually slightly over 80% of those surveyed, Gen Z surveyed, said that it was very important to them that they received reports and impact statements and things like that from the organizations that they supported via direct mail, which I find very surprising. Although I guess one kind of facet of that could potentially be that we all get far less physical mail these days. So the pieces we do get paid attention to. There's an environmental impact to some of that as well that, some organizations might need to stay away from, but really, really interesting data. I actually will link in the show notes the giving and, sorry, I keep messing it up, Generations and Giving report so that you all can take a look and read through it. It's really, really interesting stuff. But Laura and I did discuss this shift. There's that intergenerational transfer of wealth. Somewhere between 71 trillion and 120 trillion will be given away over the course of the next 20 years. Here's an interesting thought. We keep talking about this, and Laura mentioned this today too, that this, we should be seeing an uptick in planned giving. And yet in our Generations and Giving report, we are not yet seeing that. And there's a kind of hypothesis built into this report that states, and this actually is based as well on the work of Russell James, a researcher at Texas Tech University, who looks exclusively at the kind of philanthropic world, where, that will state that, baby boomers are living much longer. Generous baby boomers live even longer. People who are generous, we know this, it's a data point, they live longer. Much wealthier individuals, they also live longer. So then combine much wealthier, generous folks, they live the longest. So by that logic, those folks born prior to 1960 should live to around, there's some calculations that they'll hit 85, kind of that time frame in the 80s, in your 80s, where there's, a 1 in 4 chance of death. And that will happen in 2045. So that kind of apex of giving, we would extrapolate from this data and from this line of thinking, would happen much closer, in the next 20 years, in just under 20 years. So we're not there yet, but Laura today did emphasize that if you are not talking about planned giving, now is the time to start. It is something that you could put into your moves management, a direct path that we can put even event donors on, based on some segmentation and demographics. Really, really important to look at our information, our data, and be well ahead of the curve with that sort of ask and topic. So, let's see. So here we go. I'm going to go back now. We talked about baby boomers for a moment, but millennials and Gen Z aren't loyal to specific institutions, as I mentioned, but they are fiercely loyal to causes. And that is where the relationship piece really comes into play. A millennial, a Gen Z, they may not respond to a traditional gala, but they might well respond to a more interactive or hands-on or, kind of in the weeds type of event, rethinking the way that our events are laid out, even if we are in the midst of a traditional gala, because, right, we still have to talk to baby boomers and Gen X. And maybe that's, if in your organization, that's the preferred method of the fundraiser. Can we find components that pull our millennials and Gen Zs in more deeply? Laura talked as well about, rather than having a young person join your board as a junior board member, that feels diminutive. It feels less important. Pull them in all the way and acknowledge that the capacity might be different, but the goal is a meaningful donation. It is whatever that means for that individual person. So and it might be that that individual person is volunteers. I remember an organization that I worked with, we had a client board member always on, somebody who had been a client at a recovery organization. And it was very important to this board, and I really applauded this effort, that there was no differentiation in the way or the way that that person was spoken to or the way that they were interacted with, and they did not get any kind of subset of messaging or information. They just had a different approach in their appeals, in their outreach, and in what was asked of them. Okay, what else? Yeah, I've already covered that, so we're going to keep going. Here we go. So, practical steps to building a culture of generosity. That was one of my questions for Laura. Okay, great. This sounds wonderful. Like, what do we do? And so Laura said a couple of things that we've kind of covered already. Language matters. Partnership is the better word than ask. Investment, wonderful. Like, I know that you're giving and now you're a part of our organization. Belonging, the connection that's there. I've stated earlier that I think this year is the year of belonging and not branding. I think that falls into this culture shift in generosity as well. Our shared impact, not fundraising goal. Like, language matters. And so paying attention to that, both with your donors on the outside, as well as your staff, as well as your board. Inviting in stories, ask staff and board and donors to share why they care. Like I mentioned, those 30-second videos that I asked my board all those years ago to create for social media shares during our citywide giving day. These things matter. They have an impact, and they're also evergreen a lot of the time. You can also use them for a while. Equip your board. So not just talking points, not just your elevator pitch, but like meaningful connections to the work. Invite them in. Invite them to visit programs. Invite them to host meetings. Invite them to talk to other donors. Again, peer-to-peer, always best. And then let them also write the notes to your donors and take some of the burden and the lift off of the nonprofit. I just realized that I have been sharing this screen this whole time, and I don't need to be doing that. So I'm going to stop now and let me be full frame. All right. The next thing you can do, here's number 4, broaden your definition of generosity. So you're going to recognize time, referrals, advocacy, and feedback as really, really critical acts of support. And then finally, integrate development and program. As I mentioned, breaking down those silos like Laura shared in her example between your volunteers, volunteer manager, your development director, your executive director, your custodial staff. Share stories, understand each other, use a common language. These things really do impact culture. And when you can infuse that with the generosity component, you're really moving ahead of the game and really beginning to shift everything. Like, I know from experience that when development is isolated, it's rarely sidelined, right? Like, it's always an important component, and development always talks to the board, but it also sometimes works in a vacuum, and that is never a good thing. So we want development to be kind of embedded throughout, including with the board. And then honestly, it becomes contagious. Okay, so back to our great wealth transfer. It's happening. It's not happening as quickly as we might have thought or maybe hoped, but 124 trillion expected to change hands by 2048. And of that, it's expected 18 trillion goes to nonprofits. So over the course of the next 22 years, we anticipate $18 trillion coming into our sector. The rest of it's going to go to heirs and individuals, and they'll do with it what they will. But it will come into the economy, which also has an impact on our sector. And the people that are the stewards of that are younger generations, but they need to be engaged now. So again, not just talking about, when we're talking about this great wealth transfer, we're not just talking about planned giving, as I mentioned before. We do need to talk about that, but we also need to focus our language on these younger generations. And, they all view themselves as change makers. A lot of them have tried to create their own foundations, their own organizations, their own nonprofits, and some of that is great. Interestingly, Laura was pointing to something that she's finding that foundations are beginning, and I think some of this actually comes from community foundations too, but they're beginning to look to organizations and nonprofits to collaborate to solve problems in the community. This is an incredible thing. We don't have in our nonprofit world a real kind of mergers and acquisitions, M&A incentive a lot of times. A lot of times organizations operate separately, disconnected. here in Austin, where I live, there's actually a summit called the Austin Together Summit. And it's literally about bringing nonprofits together to find ways for people to collaborate. And Laura was expounding upon that and saying that, not only do we see that sort of work happening where nonprofits are looking to each other, but also foundations, not just community foundations, all foundations are looking, they want to see that sort of collaboration occurring among nonprofits. So, as I wrap this up, I want to, first of all, thank you for being here and staying with just me. I appreciate it. And we will take all the questions and we'll talk about this much more thoroughly with Laura in a couple of months or weeks. But I do want to say that your work matters and it's so very important. And you all are the standard bearers of this generosity shift that I know that we can see and accomplish. I think if that culture of generosity flows through all facets of our nonprofit organizations, it must flow out into our communities as well. So this work, this shift that Laura is advocating for, that we are talking about today, it has such a ripple effect. It has so much impact on all of the work that all of us are doing. So whether you are a board member or a staff member or a volunteer or a donor, you have a seat at this table. It is important what you say, what you do, and what you share. So thank you again for being with me. I'm so sorry that it was just me and not also Laura Hutira. Please look up M. Gale and Associates. Take a look at the Generosity Commission and the work that the Giving Institute and Giving USA are doing. It's really important. It's very critical work. It gives us so much information and insight. And they are also all incredible advocates for the work that we all do collectively. So let me actually now go back and share my presentation one more time. Here we go. I'm going to click carefully here. And I'm going to tell you what's coming up next. Next week, I will be joined by Candace Luisi of Knockout Fundraising for Supercharging Your Events. Candace is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the tactical, boots on the ground. What do you need to do just before and at your event to make that event a success? She also was a presenter at our Better conference in September, and another very, very popular session. She just has some really, really incredible, very specific do's and don'ts that you will not want to miss if you are an event-based fundraiser, for sure. So please join me next week. What is that? January 27th at 1:30 p.m. Central. Scan that QR code if you would like to join. You can also take a look around BetterUnite. I've mentioned BetterUnite a couple of times. We are a full suite software solution for nonprofit organizations. We have volunteer management, grants management, and then of course, all of the fundraising, donor management, email marketing. All of your teams have some solution within BetterUnite. And if you want all of that in one place, and then so much more, including all of your event software, come take a look, scan that QR code or email support@betterunite.com. And if you've got any other questions, or if you're a BetterUnite user and need help, if you would like to ask a question that you want me to pass along to Laura, send those over to support@betterunite.com. You can also email me, Leya, Leya, spelled weird, @betterunite.com, Leya@betterunite.com. And I am more than happy to send your questions over to Laura so that you can get the answers that you're looking for. I could not be more thrilled that you joined me today. Thank you so much. If this was of help to you, please do share it with your team, share it with your colleagues, and then also join me at the next 501c Drop. We're hosting these every Tuesday at 1:30 Central. So I hope to see you again soon. Until then, let's go do some good. Bye.